I'm just going to pause before I start because for me personally, this is a bit of a pinch me moment. This is pretty cool. And now welcome. I'd like to welcome you to the National Cannabis Policy Summit's Congressional Forum. My name is Caroline Phillips, and I'm the founder of the National Cannabis Festival and the National Cannabis Policy Summit. I'd like to start this morning with some thank yous. First, I'd like to thank the office of Congressman Earl Blumenauer for making it possible for us to be here today. Thank you, Congressman Blumenauer. Next, I'd like to thank the representatives of the nonprofit advocacy groups in this room today. You all have worked tirelessly for years, and in some cases decades, to get us to a place in this country where we can have conversations in spaces like this with members of Congress. So thank you to all of you for your tireless work. I would also be remiss if I didn't thank the chair of the National Cannabis Festival's Advocacy Committee and the founder of the Bull Pack, Justin Streckel. Many people in this room know the name, and Justin has been critical to the success of this event and to help pulling all of the pieces together. So thank you so much, Justin, for all of your work. Finally, I'd like to thank all of you who are here with us in this room today. I feel like we're standing at the crossroads of prohibition and legalization, and to have the opportunity to be in a space like this and to be here together, it's something that I know I'm going to remember for a long time to come, so thank you all so much for joining us. Now, just a few years ago, I think if you'd told me that I would be speaking in this room on this topic, I would have told you that that's just not going to happen. I definitely grew up in a world of prohibition. Now, just in the past week, I've had the opportunity to speak to some journalists, and they've asked, does speaking in the Congressional auditorium, is that a signal that things have changed? Is that a signal of progress? My answer has been a resounding yes, but with an asterisk, and I'm going to explain that in a second. I had a big speech prepared for this morning. I was going to talk to all of you about Congress's work on cannabis. I had some very smart things to tell you. But then something happened yesterday, and I thought to myself, perhaps real-life experience in this situation would be more valuable than a curated speech. So I'm going to tell you a quick story about what happened yesterday. Yesterday, my small business was denied the Special Events Relief Fund. That fund is federally funded, and it's been put together and designed so that small businesses like mine can receive a little bit of extra help as we come out of the pandemic. This is not the first denial that my company has gotten, and we know exactly why we were denied. It was because of the word cannabis in the National Cannabis Festival and National Cannabis Policy Summit. We were also denied the Save Our Stages grant that helped a lot of venue owners and small business owners across the country. But we're not alone. So many cannabis business owners were denied federal funding during the pandemic. So many of us had to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, look back to our communities, and hope that there was enough support and love there to bring our businesses back whole. So I stand here today representing many cannabis business owners who deal with these issues every single day. You know, I think that my plight as a business owner, it's frustrating, but it really doesn't have much on people who are locked up right now for cannabis. And it certainly has nothing on the patients who have to leave state or who are criminalized for trying to use medicine that makes them feel better. And it absolutely has nothing on the young people who choose to use cannabis and then fear that maybe they'll lose a college scholarship or not get a job or be kicked out of a house. So I am standing here to represent business owners, but I'm also standing here with all of the advocates in the room for everybody that has been criminalized or discriminated against because of this plant. But I am hopeful for the future. I'm hopeful because we're all here today. And being here feels really good. The irony of being here to talk about cannabis, when yesterday I was denied federal funding for cannabis, though, has not escaped me. So, with that said, I'd like to welcome all of you to the National Cannabis Policy Summit's Congressional Forum, and I'd like to welcome our first speaker to the stage, a woman I greatly admire, Toy Hutchinson with the Marijuana Policy Project.
Good morning, everybody. So happy to be here. My name is Toy Hutchinson. I'm president and CEO of the Marijuana Policy Project based right here in DC. MPP is a leading cannabis legalization advocacy group in the country responsible for spearheading most of the major state-level cannabis policy reforms enacted over the last 20 years. We played a leading role in enacting 12 of the 21 adult use state legalization laws and 14 of the 38 medical legalization laws. It's my great pleasure to welcome you today to the 2023 National Cannabis Festival's Congressional Forum. Today we have a panel discussion titled The New Generation of Conservative Lawmakers for Cannabis Reform, and I'm thrilled to introduce our distinguished guests. Representative Brian Mast, a Republican from Florida's 18th Congressional District, is a veteran who served in the United States Army for more than 12 years. He's a strong advocate for cannabis reform and has co-sponsored the Veterans Equal Access Act, a bill that seeks to improve veterans' access to medical marijuana. Representative Brian Mast. With swag to match.
Sit anywhere?
Sit anywhere.
All right, that's a deal.
Joining Representative Mast is Representative Nancy Mace, a Republican from South Carolina's 1st Congressional District. Representative Mace is a trailblazer who made history as the first woman to graduate from the Citadel, the prestigious military college in South Carolina. She is a vocal advocate for cannabis reform and has introduced the States Reform Act, which seeks to end the federal prohibition of cannabis. Both Representative Nancy Mace. Both Representatives Mast and Mace are members of the Congressional Cannabis Caucus, a bipartisan group of lawmakers dedicated to advancing sensible cannabis policies at the federal level. Their commitment to cannabis reform has earned them the respect and admiration from both sides of the aisle. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Representative Brian Mast and Representative Nancy Mace to the stage.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Loud and clear.
All right, well, I would hope you guys can hear me. Thank you guys for joining us today. Congresswoman Mace, Congressman Mast, I appreciate you guys making the time on behalf of the broader cannabis community. I want to start out by wishing you two and everybody on the stage a happy 420, as we do in our community. So, got to start with the good vibes. Congresswoman Mace, I'd like to start with you, as I know your time is restricted today. In a recent interview that you did, you mentioned that, in your opinion, substantive cannabis reform would be, quote, more challenging under Republican rule. Can you just talk a little bit about, the specific scenarios that make that a reality, and also, how you have attempted to kind of change that paradigm within the GOP caucus yourself?
Right, and thank you, Raj, and I do apologize. I am on a very limited time today. I want to thank Brian Mast, too, for his leadership on veterans issues, leadership on responsible cannabis reforms, especially as it relates to veterans. Having a veteran who's been through so much and so much sacrifice for his country, to be the voice for so many veterans like him. And I could never talk about or explain the circumstances that they've been through and the trauma that they've had when they come home from war. And I appreciate him being my partner in many of these issues and appreciate his leadership. This is an issue where I expressed concern that when Republicans were in the majority that it would not, we wouldn't make as much progress. We haven't had a vote yet on safe banking. And here we had, Silicon Valley Bank and other banks that were under tremendous financial stress. The FDIC has the insurance fund. Well, there's about $10 billion out there of canvas money of companies that would love to bank and pay into the FDIC insurance fund. Problem solved, right? And so, that's concerning that we haven't done that yet. There are a lot of things we could do for small businesses if we wanted to address 280E because of inflation and supply chain issues, and businesses are failing left and right now, particularly in this industry. That there are things that we could be doing to help the small business guy, to help the little guy, to help the guy that wants and needs banking, but we're not doing any of that. And I would even argue that a lot of what we're doing right now has no chance of ever passing the Senate and will not help the American people. And this is an easy win. There was polling last week from Winthrop University, statewide polling that I hadn't seen yet. I know what my district looked like about 2.5 years ago. But in the entire state of South Carolina, bright red South Carolina, 76 to 77% of residents in bright red conservative South Carolina support medical cannabis. Okay, huge number, higher than I thought possible. Now, the interesting number, it was like 55%, 56% of all the residents in bright red South Carolina support adult use cannabis. And so you've just seen this issue. It shouldn't be controversial for Republicans. This is a winning issue for us if we do it in a responsible manner. And I just don't, I'm confused. Maybe it's because our generation is a little bit younger, perhaps, but I'm just confused why we just can't make at least the tiniest little bit of incremental change to help these businesses who are doing business legally in states across the country. I don't understand it. It's a wildly popular idea. Put it on a referendum, put it on the ballot, and see where it goes, because it'll be successful. But lawmakers are too afraid to do that. So.
Thank you. Yeah,
I love you too, baby.
yeah, it's really interesting. You know, I'm imagining that you're probably, you know, kind of firsthand in your conversations with the caucus experiencing something that myself and a lot of others in the room have went through, which is having to have a conversation about cannabis, you know, with somebody that may or may not be fully educated or may have very deeply ingrained biases, let's say.
And that's why I tell people all the time, go poll, and I'm gonna, this is my last question, you're gonna pull me off the stage with a hook, and I apologize, I could talk about this all day. But that's why I encourage Republicans to poll their districts on the issue, poll their state, look at the data and the research that's out there. And I will tell you, I go all over the country to cannabis, different just different events, cannabis events, and no matter where I go, when I'm outside the state of South Carolina, inevitably, whether I'm in Miami or Texas or California, New York, about a cannabis event, inevitably I meet someone from my home state of South Carolina where it's prohibited who is ready. They have a retail space, they wanna grow, they wanna sell medical, whatever it is, they're ready to go, and they're usually Republican. And so it's mind-boggling to me, because the only place that cannabis is controversial is up here in D.C. The rest of America is way far ahead of where we are up in Washington, and that's got to change. We need voices like Brian, voices like mine, voices like everybody in the room here today, advocating to their members of Congress and saying why this is good for the economy, why this is good for veterans, why this is good for those with terminal illness or chronic illness, and why this is good for adult use. So, you know, those are things we've got to be talking about, and I would just encourage every member of Congress, go poll your district. I think they'd be shocked at how supportive people are. I was shocked when I saw the numbers for the state of South Carolina in bright red conservative South Carolina, and I was happy to see that. So thank you so much, and I apologize. I'll come back anytime, and thank you. And Brian.
See you, Nancy.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for your time, Congresswoman Mace. All right. Congressman Mast, if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of dive into just a similar kind of question with you.
Closer. You're so far away. It feels elitist to sit with a seat.
A little bit more cozy here.
DC political class. That's what this is.
So yeah, kind of the same question for you, as somebody that's also, you know, relatively new to the Congress. How have you approached the conversations with cannabis, the conversations about cannabis that you've had with people within your own party?
I think the one, like anything that you're speaking to, know your audience that you're speaking to. There's 435 different people here, and they all have different, let's call them potential biases. That was a word that was used before. So is somebody's bias a political bias because of what they believe based upon what happened in an election because of the electorate that they represent, not just in their state, but in their immediate district that they represent? There's a political bias. Is there a data bias for the individual because, you know, they're strict on, you know, what are the graphs, the data, the statistics, and they saw something that they think, you know, is hurting why they're going to get on that? Is that the bias? And so know your audience, and that's what I always do. For me, I try to come to it like any policy and just be intellectually honest that if I believe the policy is this here, then it should be this here as well and this here as well. And so I'm a states' rights guy, libertarian in many of my views, and look at it and say, okay, if I believe this is states' rights and this is states' rights and this is states' rights, well then this is too. And so much of my GOP audience talks about states' rights constantly, and if they're going to talk about it, find the places that they talk about that, say that, remind them of where they made those intellectually sound state right arguments, and then say, what is the difference here? Because I don't see it if you're being intellectually honest about it, and that's where I come to it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So I'd like to shift gears quickly. We'll get back to the states' rights conversation because that is something that we want to address. But I'd like to ask you about the Veterans Equal Access Act, which you recently sponsored into Congress. The sort of a two-parter. So first, I'd like to ask, obviously you have personal experience as a veteran. What drew you to cannabis specifically and kind of made you want to throw your support behind that bill particular with all the other cannabis bills that are circulating? And the other part of the question is, this act is something that's been introduced multiple times, I think 3 or 4 times in just the last couple sessions. So why do you believe that now is different and it'll pass this time?
So just one, I'll start with the importance of it, and then we'll go to what's different today in the House of Representatives. I was a bomb tech in the Army. I served about a dozen years. I was injured back in 2010. And when I woke up, not far down the road from here, Walter Reed Army Medical Center, for me, I was very at peace. I was at peace with everything that I did on the battlefield, everything that happened to me on the battlefield. Growing up, I've never been a cannabis user, not once in my life, and since then, never been a cannabis user once in my life. That's my experience in life. But for so many of my friends in the military that also woke up in Walter Reed Army Medical Center, and to put a number on that period of time, when I was there, 2010, 11, 12 timeframe, there was 50, 60, 70 men and women a month that were waking up in a very similar condition to my own. That's just Walter Reed and our very catastrophic injury experiences. Obviously, there's a host of, thousands of other coming back from war that were not at peace with what they experienced or what they did or what happened to them. And I saw friends in both of those situations, whether they came back whole, visibly looking at them, or not whole, that were debilitated. And likewise, just as clearly as I could see that how debilitated these individuals were, I could also see likewise how they found a peace, with cannabis use. It's just the fact of the matter that it was a difference in their life, that something about it made it so that they could cope, they could get back to work, they could deal, they could sleep, they could not need whatever prescriptions it was that they were on. And this is another part of the conversation. Veterans have been put on laundry lists of prescription drugs. And, from just going back to my story briefly, when I woke up in the hospital, I had probably never had a more serious surgery than getting my tonsils out when I was 3 or 4 years old. And so, likewise, I had never been on any painkillers, medication, Tylenol or Motrin from time to time. That's about it. I woke up, I was on oxys, morphines, epidurals, sleep sedatives, antidepressants, anti-inflammatories, you name it, 20 different things that I'd never touched before in my life. And I was able to wean myself off pretty quick, but there was a lot of people that became very dependent on those things, and they found a different and better path through cannabis use than the traditional pharmaceutical path that was destroying their life, their family life. So I told a lot about that, and I totally forgot about the second part of your question. What was that again?
Why do you think it can pass now?
Why do I think it can pass? Thank you. So what happens in this country in 2023 is different than 2022 and 2021 and 2020 and so on. Same in Congress. Every 1 year in Congress is different. Every 2 years in Congress is even different. There are new representatives here that are not, this is an important political point, not entrenched in a position that they took 10 or 15 years ago or 20 years ago. That matters in this place. Just to be frank again about knowing your audience that you're talking to, traditionally when somebody puts forward a position in this place in whatever year they're in, they generally keep that position for the next 2 or 20 or however many years that they are here. And that's the nature of it. So that's knowing your audience, that you have to know somebody's historical position on this and try to address that. What has changed when they took that position 10 years ago versus today, if you want to have an effective conversation with them. And likewise, having an early conversation with new members that come here, that's important as well. And I'm not allowed to politic or fundraise or things like that in this building. It's illegal for me to do. So I want to say this before I make this comment, that I am not soliciting funds or making a comment about fundraising or anything, but I'm going to make an example of how sometimes you have to make things touch different people, right? Safe banking has been something that people talk about, right? And the fact that, you have a retail location that maybe you're renting out to other people, but you can't go through the banking system, or you can't pay your rent with it, or you can't take, I'm preaching to the choir. I don't have to explain it all to you all. So the question that I would beg would be, in all of the states, if all of the various dispensaries started making political contributions to their representatives or senators, what would their banks say, and what would they have to do with that money? And I think it's a very important question to beg, whether it's $1 or $10 or $100 or whatever. Like I said, I'm not allowed to say go out and do that here or anything like that, but that's an important question to beg, because now you are receiving that in the system. Are you going to return it? Are you going to not return it? What's your bank going to say to you, the representative, about what just took place with your campaign banking? It's an important question to beg. And sometimes you have to put the question directly in front of people to help them to understand how it is that you have to deal with the situation. So that's an idea, and to go back to the point of, that's why I think things change, because every year that you have people here, you have a new opportunity for people that are not entrenched in a political point that they decided however many years ago, maybe on a different data set or a different political point.
Thank you. Thank you for addressing that. And so, all Florida dispensary owners, you heard it here. Feel free to drop off the unmarked cash at Congressman Mast's office. Just kidding.
You do it the right way, right? You do it the right way, but beg the question.
Yes, definitely. So backpedaling a little bit, I want to return to a subject that you just mentioned and that Congresswoman Mace mentioned before she departed, but that's states' rights. There's a big disparity between the way that certain folks on the left and certain folks on the right view the cooperation between states and the federal government in the regulation, the legislation, oversight of cannabis. You've mentioned yourself being a big states' rights proponent, as are many people within your caucus. So how do you think about the balance between something like the Veterans Equal Access Act, which maybe relates more to the federal government, versus staying true to your strong beliefs about states' rights and kind of a hands-off type of approach where it's just straight legalization and then the states handle everything else?
Veterans Equal Access Act falls very much into states' rights. It says, in states where cannabis is legal, which is the state making its own determination, those VA practitioners can go out there and they can have conversations about cannabis. That's taking the federal law and making sure that it adheres to the state law that's in place. We have another bill known as the Graham Act, right? The Graham Act says, listen, in states where cannabis use is legal, that can't go out there and degrade your, a well-regulated, a well-regulated militia for the purpose of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. You can't be denied your Second Amendment right for that scheduled product because your state has made that a legal entity. It's another example of taking, what is federal policy and making sure that it fits what is the state's rights. And then just to say something from a little bit more 30,000 feet that this place needs to look more and more at, it is that the state government, they work for the people, right? And the federal government, the state governments don't work for the federal government. The federal government works for the state government and works for the people. That has to be the direction, not from the top down, but from the, I don't mean to say bottom up, but you get it from the most local level level up, and that's how it has to work. So, anyway.
Great. Thank you very much. I know we're running a little bit short on time here, so I wanted to just, again, thank you for coming out and lending your time to this event. Any other last remarks or final statements or anything you wanted to touch on that I didn't ask? We have about, I think, a minute left, maybe 45 seconds.
Yeah, I guess I'd just say, I know in the opening remarks there was a conversation made, and we got my colleague Dave Joyce out here, another leader in the Cannabis Caucus, and this is a prohibition, and we're not, in 1920 to 1933 or whatever those years were, that prohibition existed, but there's lessons to be learned from that. There's lessons to be learned about what happens with crime. There's lessons to be learned about listening to the people. There's a host of things to be learned from that, and it should be looked at. The 18th Amendment, that took place at that time, and we should look at it and learn. I say that specifically because we are in a legislative body here that's tasked with supporting and defending the Constitution of the United States, and there's a number of things that you can learn from the Constitution on a daily basis, no matter how many times you read it, and ask your representatives to reapply what they are tasked with supporting and defending here down to the states' rights and down to everything else. So in that, I just say I appreciate y'all having me. I thank you for taking the time to come here and have questions and concerns and exercise your First Amendment right of petitioning your government and addressing issues that you feel need to be addressed. And look forward to seeing you all around again. Y'all take care.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Congressman Mast. Thank you all.